Ketanji Brown Jackson, give me your sense of how you think she is going to fit in on this court, and keeping in mind forefronted that she very well may serve the vast majority of her term being in the minority of justices. So, like, what, generically speaking, if that's the case versus one being on the majority side, do you need to be a different justice for that moment? And what should that be if for those of us who are, want the court to be as left as possible? And, I don't know that the three, liberal justices are necessarily that left, but they're certainly more left than the other six on the court.
Yeah. So, I mean, I could speak to how Ketanji Brown Jackson has behaved as a lower court judge, which is, I mean, she has a reputation for writing very, very long opinions. And she is especially likely to write like 100-page or more opinions in the most politically charged cases, cases where, about whether Donald Trump could be forced to testify or Donald Trump's advisors can be forced to testify or not, cases about whether a Trump program is lawful or not. And this is true. I mean, sometimes she ruled in favor of Trump, sometimes she ruled against Trump, but those opinions tend to be very, very long. And I think the reason why she took that approach is because she knew her decisions would ultimately be appealed to a very hostile Supreme Court. And so she knew that she couldn't cut corners, that she had to show that every part of her reasoning was airtight. She had to walk people through it. She had to assume that the people reading her opinions were adults and wanted to know what was going on. And then, I mean, I see the opposite. Like when I cover the Fifth Circuit, which is this extraordinarily partisan conservative court that oversees Texas and Louisiana and Mississippi, often you get these really short clipped opinions that declare things without much justification. And, when you have a Supreme Court majority, you can get away with that because, they just have to like the outcome. It doesn't matter if you've got good reasoning. I think Ketanji Brown Jackson knows that when you are swimming upstream against a right-wing court, you have to make sure all your T's are crossed and all your I's are dotted. And I suspect that that's what we're going to see from her as a dissenting justice is, just believing that through sheer force of the effort of making the most comprehensive possible case, she can maybe shame her colleagues into behaving sensibly.
Is there a value to those extended dissents, which I think is safe to assume that they're going to be? Does the value lie solely in the moment of trying to convince those other justices, or is there a value for essentially planting seeds for a different balanced court down the road in which to do you follow my what I'm? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Will you expand on that and explain how that process takes hold? Like, how can justice, whoever it is, 20 years from now, the fifth sort of left-leaning justice on the court, it's Kavanaugh, Gorsuch, and Amy Coney Barrett, and maybe, I don't know who else is hung on, Alito at that point. And there's five now liberal justices. How do they look back on some of those briefs to reverse the stuff that we're going to see over the next 10, 15 years?
So oddly enough, I think the smartest strategist on this point is Justice Scalia, the conservative icon. Scalia used to always write these really pugnacious opinions, had really grabby language in it. And he was very open about why he did that. He said, look, I am not going to change my colleagues' minds. I'm not going to change the current generation's minds. But if you go to law school, like the way that law school works is every textbook, they're called case books. And the reason why is because the way that the law is taught is you read Supreme Court opinions and you read the majority opinion and you read the dissenting opinion. And then, you have a discussion in class with the professor about like what points the majority thought was important, what points the dissent was important, and so on and so forth. And Scalia's theory is, look, I can write these really punchy dissents. All these law students are going to read them. And in 20 years, they're going to be running the damn country. And if I can convince them, then I win 20 years down the road. And so that is a path that is available to Ketanji Brown Jackson or to any other justice on the Supreme Court. I think the problem with that path is, I do not believe in the idea that, like, I think the Federalist Society is very fond of, that Scalia just made such a great case for originalism, and originalism is so persuasive that now, no, the reason why Republicans control the Supreme Court and the reason why originalism is having a moment is because the Electoral College gave the White House to Donald Trump, even though Hillary Clinton won the 2016 election. It's because malapportionment gave the Senate to Republicans, even though Democrats received more votes. And so, in the alternative universe where we had fair elections in the United States, we would probably have like a 6-3 Democratic majority on the Supreme Court. So
this would all be academic. We would
this would all be academic. Yeah. But assuming that we can solve our electoral problems, then, like, the path for a dissenting justice is to think about, I'm not going to persuade Neil Gorsuch to be sensible, but I might persuade the person who's going to be appointed to the Supreme Court in 20 years.
That's interesting. And we should say that potential person is going to respond to a different type of dissent than maybe the one that was open to the idea that, like Scalia said, that racism is essentially over. like it doesn't make sense for, if Ketanji Brown Jackson, and we don't know that she does, but if she did have that desire to speak to a Supreme Court justice who's not even probably born yet, or maybe is just entering into law school, in this year or something, it's not going to be the same, type of language, I guess, that Scalia would use, because that person's going to be more like her than it will be more like Scalia, I guess, right, in terms of who that will be. All right. So, and do you get the sense that, based upon your reading of what she would write as an appellate judge, that she would, that she's suited to that task? Are there other, between Sotomayor and Kagan, are they also suited towards that task? Do you think that they have that sensibility, or that sense of that's what they're doing?
So I think that Sotomayor and Kagan have different strategies in their dissent, and they're very complementary of each other. So Justice Kagan is I think she's probably the smartest justice. She's brilliant. She's very technocratic in her approach, and she's very good at using the other side's rhetoric against itself. Like, she is probably the most, Gorsuch loves to talk about textualism, and then he'll happily ignore the text of a statute when he wants a particular result. Justice Kagan is actually a really committed textualist. And she's really, there was a Voting Rights Act case recently, for example, where, Justice Alito wrote the majority opinion, and he just made a bunch of crap up. Like, he said that, like, any voting restriction that was commonplace in 1982 is presumptively lawful. Where does that rule come from? It's sure as hell not in the statute. And right. Justice Kagan wrote a brilliant dissent where she said that Alito's opinion mostly occupies a law-free zone. And just in a very crisp, it was rhetorically very profound about the importance of the Voting Rights Act, but the meat of that opinion was just a very crisp, technocratic, no, this is what the text of the law says. This is how judges are supposed to behave. And, like, as a lawyer, I am going to tell you what the statute actually says. Sotomayor, I think, tends to have more aspirational dissents, especially in the criminal justice context. The interesting thing about Sotomayor is that she's one of, I think, two justices who are former prosecutors, but she's the only justice who is a state level prosecutor, which means that she had to work a lot with cops. And I think the lesson that she got out of that is she knows every trick that the cops pull. And now she calls them out on it in her opinions. Sotomayor, I think, while Kagan is like looking at today's battle and saying like, here is what should have happened today. Sotomayor, I think, is trying to articulate, a broader vision and like, be more aspirational, give liberals something more to aspire to. I don't know. I mean, being a justice is different than being a judge, because when you're a justice, like there aren't constraints on you. You only have to follow precedent when you feel like it. You hear the most difficult cases. You hear the most politically charged cases. And so like, I don't know if KBJ is going to wind up being more like Kagan or more like Sotomayor. I don't know if she's going to find a different path. But like one thing that, because I think Kagan and Sotomayor have both charted like very different and very complementary paths in their dissent, I think that would give, hopefully Justice Jackson a fair amount of leeway to figure out like, okay, what is my role to play here in this project, given that these other roles are already being fulfilled?